Hey there, this is Atul from team K21 Academy, and in this lab or video, we're going to talk about how to create and connect to a virtual machine of type Windows on Microsoft Azure Cloud. Now, as we go standard, I'll explain you what we're going to expect, and what we're going to cover in this. So first is like if you're not familiar with virtual machine, we'll talk about we are going to create a virtual machine. Virtual machine is nothing but kind of your laptop that you have, a server you have, but that's on a virtual version of that, on which you deploy your applications, you deploy your databases or any application that needs a compute, which is your CPU or memory, and then attach some disk storage. That's a virtual machine. Now, in the theory part, we are going to discuss a lot further on to this, but think of it as a diagram that you see is a machine on which you deploy application. That machine will be created inside a subnet, and that subnet is nothing but continuous block of IP addresses from where virtual machine gets its IP. This subnet is a part of virtual machine. That virtual machine then in turn is needs a data store or storage disks, and we attach these disks as a part of operating system disk, and then you can attach some additional disk as well. Now, this machine, as I said, will need some IP. Now you can have a private IP which is only accessible within Azure network, or you can have a public IP so that it's accessible over the internet. So in order to test this machine, we are going to assign the public IP here. Now, all the resources that you create inside Azure, if you might have heard, if you're listening this as a part of Azure and you've gone through the previous content, this these resources that we create, like virtual machine or network or IP addresses or storage, all this is stored in a logical container called resource group. And that resource group is basically, you can apply some policies, you can put all the resources and manage life cycle of these resources in a group, that resource group. And we are going to access it over the internet. So that's what we're going to cover. So before I go further, let's see what you're going to expect in this. As always, we look introduction, which I've given you, and if you want to read a little bit more about different type of virtual machines that you create, what that is, you can read out this in under introduction section. Chapter 2 will be documentation link. So whatever documents we have used to create this machine and the supporting documents, or this lab and the supporting documents, will be all inside this, and you can read them further by clicking on these links here. Now, other thing is, there's a note which says stop the virtual machine if you're not using this machine, because it's going to use your free trial account or a paid account, and I'll explain that as well as we move forward. So that's chapter number 2. Then chapter 3 is actually crux, where we how to install this virtual machine. And there are different type of operating system you can install. I'm going to use this for Windows, but there'll be a corresponding video and guide for Linux as well. And there we're going to install Ubuntu type or operating system Ubuntu. You can use this guide for also installing Red Hat, etc. So there'll be a separate guide about how to create a Linux type virtual machine and connect to that. So once we have created a Windows virtual machine, and then we are going to see how to connect it. Now you're going to use a tool called RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, that comes by default as a client on Windows to connect it. So because if you are running a Windows machine or a laptop and you're doing all the lab training and lab from a Windows machine or Windows PC, then you're going to use that default tool that comes, which is Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDC Remote Desktop Client that we see. If you're using Mac, then you can go for next section, where you need to download a tool, client tool, which is a remote desktop client to connect from Mac to your Windows machine. We also have a chapter about how to reset the password. We'll talk about that password as I create an instance and so if you forgot your password, how do you reset password on here? And also, then there is a install web server, which you may or may not do it right now, but I'll cover that in this video later. Once you've created installed a Windows server, how do you install a IIS or a web server on that and then test it? And then finally, we'll talk about how to delete these resources, because if I'm practicing, I'm doing it on a Windows free trial account. So you don't get charged for that. So that's why it's important that you either shut down the machine or terminate the machine if you're not going to use it after that, so that you don't get charged for this machine. And then there'll be troubleshooting section as well. And apart from that, there's one more thing which I would like to highlight. There is a section called prerequisite, and that will tell what all things you should have done before in order to proceed this activity guide. So because we are creating a Windows machine on Azure, you should already have a Azure either free trial account, or if you don't, or maybe a paid account, but you should have an account which on which so that you can create your machine in that Azure portal. Now, how to create a Azure account, free trial account? There's already a video on the portal for you, so you should have access to that. And I'm assuming you already have that account created. Also, if you there's another document, as I said, or another video and guide which is about creating a virtual machine on Linux, that should already be, if you have already performed that, then most of the steps are going to be same, except that where we select a Windows machine. And then second thing we select is that how to connect to that machine. When we're creating a machine, we are saying Windows, and then how do we connect to that machine? Those are the things going to different, which I'll explain you. So first thing, in order to achieve this, we'll simply go to portal.azure.com. And if you have not logged in, make sure you log in and search from on your services from top virtual machine. And then you provide all the details. So let me go and explain as we go onto the portal. It's going to be straightforward, but let me explain as we move forward. So this is I'm already logged into portal.azure.com. As I said, you should already have seen. You can either go from here, virtual machines, click on virtual machines, or you should already have a virtual machine here if you have already accessed it in past. So let's suppose you have never accessed, this is first time you're doing, type virtual and you'll see virtual machine. So this is what we need to be, what we are interested in. Now, this is where you'll see all the virtual machines that are created under this account. But then if you notice here, there's a filter applied that basically subscription is, in my case, subscription is where it tells how you got access to this Azure. Is it Azure Pass? Is it Azure paid account? Is it a pay as you go? And you can have multiple subscription as well onto this. So we are right now, I'm using Azure Pass, that if you're part of Azure administration, Azure solution architect, or any of your Azure trainings, then you should have a Azure. We are going to give you Azure Pass that you can use to practice after you've used the 30 days free trial account. So now here, what I'm going to do is, from here, I'm going to say create, and there are different type of virtual machines. This is the virtual machine that I'm interested on. There's also a preset configurations, which will have a predefined configurations. There's a Azure Arc, a virtual machine, which is used for non-Azure environments. You can read more onto this by searching if you want to go deeper into what this Azure Arc means. And there is another option which is Azure VMware Solution Virtual Machine, which means you can have an entire VMware solution on Microsoft Azure and then creating virtual machine inside that VMware solution. This is mainly important if you're migrating from an on-premise VMware solution to Azure Cloud, or you already want to deploy it in a VMware based solution on Microsoft Azure. So we are going to create it under, from here, under virtual Azure Virtual Machine. You click on this. And some of these things, if you have already followed my Linux or Windows or Linux machine on Azure, you probably already know some of these things, but I'll repeat here. Now, or you can fast forward and go to the specific point where we come to the Windows section. So this is where we say subscription. This could be your Azure Pass, free trial account, paid account, etc. Now, if you look at it saying I already have a subscription which is disabled, so I can't use that. But if you look at drop down, there's one more subscription which is Azure Pass. So I'm selecting this Azure subscription. In your account, make sure you have a valid subscription, which could be a pay as you go or a trial account or a Azure Pass and so on. Now, resource group, you can read a little bit more here as well, but resource group, as I said earlier, is a collection of resources on which that manage or that maintains a common life cycle and apply the security policies, which means if I want to manage all of, for example, this machine, network, databases, or sorry, the uh, storage, etc., as a one unit, I can put them into resource group, and then I can maybe delete all of them together or apply or give some permissions as a single unit onto this resource group. So you can create a new resource group. I'm going to create a new resource group. Like, so we'll type that as K21 Academy dash VM dash Windows. So it's a Windows type VM. For that, I'm creating a resource group. So, and click on, so I think it's already created. I've selected this here. So it's not letting me do the K21. So I'll just say, So it was, for some reason, it was not letting me create a K21 Academy dash VM version. So maybe it identified that K21 Academy is our trademark. That's why it didn't let me. So I'm selecting K21 VM Win, anything that you can remember later. So I'll select this as a resource group. Now this is where I'm going to select the virtual machine name. So I'll say VM Windows 01 or whatever name you want to assign to this virtual machine. Now, this is the region in which you want to place this virtual machine. So this machine can be in a specific country like US East, US West, or maybe Europe, India, wherever you want to put it. Now, some of the machines may or may not be available, or shape that we're going to see later, we may or may not be available in a specific country. So I'm going to use, for now, I'll leave it to default US Central US. But if type of VM I want to select is not available in that particular region, I can go and select different region from here. Now, next is availability options, which means that tells you other things like availability zone, which means another data centers, multiple data centers. You want to place them into availability zone. You want to also, there is another concept called virtual machine scale set and availability set. So as we move forward and when we go and look into the compute module, we'll go deeper into what is a scale set, what is availability set. So for now, we'll leave it to default. You can say no infrastructure redundancy, which means you don't want any high availability for this machine. Or you can say, I want to place them to availability zone, but then you can define how many availability zone you want. Do you want one availability zone? That will be one machine. I want two availability zones, then it'll create two virtual machines. Or if you want three availability zones, it'll create three virtual machines, which means I'm going to pay for three machines. So I'll leave it to default one availability zone, which means only one machine in, and I'm going to select in zone one. Or I can unselect it and let Windows decide. Um, so it can pick, Azure will pick in which availability zone out of those three availability zone in US, Central US, where to place it. Now, next is security type. So it's saying the value must not be empty. So I think I need to select, I'll select zone one. I'm keeping it in zone one. Now, security type dictates when the different security feature available on this boot operating system. So for example, if you see it's a trusted launch virtual machine, which means it will have some more additional hardened or more secure part. So basically, for example, it's protecting us against persistent and advanced attacks on Gen 2 virtual machines with it's configuring some secure boot virtual trusted platform or VTPM module it's enabled, which is a little bit more secure for bootable disks. So depending on the security requirement, for now, you'll be slightly higher. It will be higher charges if you're selecting trusted virtual machine here. Because it's a trial account and I want to just create a virtual machine to see how it works, I'm going to leave it to default standard. Now, image is what dictates what operating system you want. So if you have already done Ubuntu machine, you know where at that point we selected Ubuntu. But now because I want to create a Windows machine, I'm going to select a Windows here. Now you can say Windows Server 2016 or Windows Server 2019. So I'm going to pick the latest Windows Server 2019 generation 2. Now, if you notice, I just go a message saying that this size is currently unavailable in Central US, which I'll cover that in a minute when we come to that. But before that, there's a VM architecture, which means what is the architecture? Is it ARM64 or x86-64? And currently, it's saying it have automatically picked up x64 because for my Windows Server 2019 data center Gen 2, ARM64 is not supported. So I only can select x64. Now, run with Azure Spot Discount. It's basically um, this kind of a machine. If I select Spot Discount, that's a slightly cheaper, but that means Microsoft Azure can pick up that machine or shut down that machine if they're really under overstressed or overutilized, or they have a lot of resources, or other customers want machines in that particular data center, and if they don't have bandwidth, they might shut down my machine. So I'm going to leave it to default, which is not select here. Now, size dictates how many CPUs or how much memory I want to allocate to this machine. And I can change these things later. But for now, at the time of creation, how much CPU? So it says 2 vCPUs, 8 gig memory. But it's saying this size is not available in the region which I've selected, which is US Central. So this is another option to select why you pick a particular region depending on your machine that you want to create may or may not be available in that particular region. So I'm going to pick another region, which is US East. Usually get it US East, and then see if it's machine. Now, if you notice here, I don't get that warning, which means my 2V CPU, 8 gig memory, it's available. And now, if I keep this machine down, oh, sorry, up all the time, it's going to cost me 9,000 rupees per month. But that's if I'm going to keep this machine up all the time. That's why we recommend you to shut it down once if when you used it. Now, when you shut down, you don't pay for any CPU and memory, which is the biggest cost. There's slight cost about disk, but that's very, very minimal. And anyway, that's going to come out from your free trial account, so you'll not pay anything unless you upgrade that free account to pay-as-you-go model. Let me repeat one more time. Unless you upgrade that free account to pay-as-you-go, you won't be charged from Microsoft. Also, it's important that you shut down the machine. When you shut down the machine, you don't get charged for CPU and memory. You get charged only for the disk space or underlying storage, which is very, very cheap. And some of that is already free, or in trial account, anyway, you get free. Now, next is you're selecting username. So I'm going to pick or select user. I think it's always good to put for Windows administrator, and then password. So it's saying username must not include a reserved word. So administrator is reserved word. I'll use simple admin here in that case. Now, again, admin is also reserved word. So I'll say win admin is the username. Typically, ideally, I keep same name as my machine so that I remember that. So I'll keep it same machine VM Windows 01, or you can use whatever name you want. I think in our documentation here, we must have used a username called Azure user. So let's stick to the much guide here, Azure user. Now this is where you enter the password. Now you have to remember this password. For some reason, if you forgot this password, you can reset that password from the console. I'm going to show you. Now this is the inbound port, and let me explain you what I mean by inbound port. So what's happening is when you're creating this machine, there's a firewall that gets created. That firewall is nothing but NSG that you see. Again, we're going to look and go deeper into Azure administration, Azure solution architect, these firewalls or security group, what these are. So what we are saying is, because I want to allow access, because I need to test it from the internet, so the port number which my Windows machine is listening, or RDP client is RDP server is listening, which is 3389, that should be open across internet. So that's what I'm saying here, and saying allow port number, and RDP port listens on default 3389, so allow that port. Now later on this machine, I'm going to run a web server which will be listening probably on port number 80 or 443. So I'll be allowing 80 and 443 HTTPS port as well. So I can select that. So all these ports are allowed from over the public inbound or over the internet. Now I can change these later as well. Now there's a licensing. So if you already have a Windows Server license which you bought it for on-premise, you can select it here. Now you can then go and click on review and create, but there are other options available. So this is the virtual machine that we've created, but this virtual machine will need disk, virtual machine will need networking. So when I say this disk where my operating system gets installed, it will also need, if you want, you can attach some additional data disk like your D drive, E drive, and then it also needs a IP address which will be picked from a subnet, and that subnet will be created in virtual network, or we call VNet. So these things should also be created that we are going to see on these options. So first disk, here you're saying, do you want to encrypt the disk? So the data stored will be encrypted um, on the disk at encryption level. So what happens about that encryption on that disk? Again, as we go into later in the program, we're going to go deeper into these security and these encryption decryption as well. Now there are different type of disk. As we go to the storage, we'll read into more on that, but here there are different type of disk storage operating system disk available. So I'm selecting premium solid state disk, which are locally redundant on for this virtual machine. This is where I'm saying my delete this key VM, delete with VM. So my operating system disk, if I decide to delete my VM, the corresponding operating system disk on which my OS is installed will also get deleted. Here key. So For this disk, data will be encrypted, but that encryption will happen using a key that can be managed by either platform, which is Azure, or you can have your own customer managed keys. So we'll leave it to default platform managed keys. This is where I'm seeing disks. So by default, apart from the operating system disk, which is C drive, you can have add more disks like D drive, E drive. We're going to add them later, not in this, but when we cover storage disk, storage module, when that time we are going to add some additional disk, and then you can look into advanced. Similarly, networking, what's happening is I'm by default creating a new network called K21 VM VNet. It's by default creating. You can use the existing one as well. And I'm saying the default subnet for this is my CIDR range for on which my IP address is. It's going to pick my machine IP from private IP from this subnet. What is the subnet? What are the CIDRs? We are going to cover again in networking module. Then it's going to create a new public IP and assign this public IP and so on. Like that, there are some additional things like for management, how do we manage this operating system? What all monitoring will be configured? The advanced settings on this machine, you can go and read. I want to keep it simple for now for this particular video, and then later we'll go deeper into these if you want to go further deep into in subsequent videos. Tag will dictate, it's a key value pair which will say, for example, you can say this type of VM is for production environment, dev environment, test environment, or for which project these are machines are for. And this is where you can select. So we're going to leave all default. The basic ones, important ones, we are here, and simply say review and create. So right now it's going to review and see whatever options you have given, it can create these machines or not. So it's saying that it's going to cost me around 13 rupees, which means like I think if I look 20 cents or less than 20 cents an hour, which is quite cheap for this machine of this size. And it has given me all the options and saying yes, validations have all passed. All I now need to do is click on create to create this machine. When I'm creating this machine, it'll tell me the deployment will kick off and any alert will come to know from this alert here. So it's saying initializing the deployment. So I'm going to pause this recording, and in the next part of this video, we are going to tell you the remaining thing, which means once it is created, we are going to access it using a remote desktop client, RDP. We call our protocol remote desktop protocol, RDP, or RDC remote desktop client, using remote desktop client, and then other things which I'm going to cover in next. So give it probably 5 minutes or so. It's, if you look at here, it's creating a virtual machine. It's created the IP addresses, network security group, virtual network, and then virtual machines. Now it's creating. So I'll see you in part 2 of this video.
So guys, if you also want to have a good job around Azure Cloud, then we have something really special for you. We have our absolutely free class on how to prepare for Azure Cloud jobs and certification. Under this interactive session, you'll be learning about top certification options in Azure Cloud, job opportunities, our 8-week roadmap to learn, get certified, and get higher paying jobs. So if you want to register for the same, all you have to do is just log on to k21academy.com/AZ10402. You'll be seeing this kind of interface. Just click on book your free seats now, and after that select event date, add your full name, your email address, your phone number, and click on yes, save my seats now. Moving ahead, you'll be seeing this kind of link on the extreme right. You just have to click it, save it, and I'll see you in the free class. Till then, take care and keep learning.